Hello, good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak to you today. So my name's Nicola and I'm an engineer, but I work in quite an unusual setting. I work at a museum, so I'm in the kind of arts and heritage sector. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on, but firstly I want to tell you how I ended up getting into such an unusual engineering job, because it's a bit of an interesting story. So I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I grew up. As a child, I didn't really know anybody working in STEM. And to be honest, I was changing my mind every 5 minutes about what sort of career I wanted. And in particular, I grew up with all of the really unhelpful stereotypes about scientists and engineers and what they looked like and what sort of work they did. I was quite interested in science, and I was really interested in the world around me, and I really enjoyed learning about why things are how they are, but I never saw myself as a scientist or as an engineer, because I didn't really feel that passionate about doing experiments, and I wasn't very good at making or fixing things. So with those stereotypes, I hadn't really seen myself in that sort of job. But fortunately, my physics teachers in particular really encouraged me to carry on studying science and maths. So I'm really grateful to them for kind of keeping me going with it. My favourite subject was economics, and in particular, I really liked the way that maths could be used and applied to model and to describe these kind of real business and behavioural situations. I found that really fascinating. So I knew I wanted to go to university, and my teachers were really encouraging me to stick with physics or to stick with science. And eventually I decided I was going to study engineering, because I'd been told it was a way of using maths to model real life situations, and also that it would keep my options open, and that I'd be really employable to work in things like business or management, as well as obviously having lots of STEM roles open to me. So I was predicted straight A's, so I decided to apply to Cambridge, not really knowing what I was doing, but the reason I chose the course was basically because it doesn't specialise until the third year. So because I didn't really know very much about engineering, that gave me as much time as possible to have a go at the different areas, and to try and figure out what I wanted to specialise in. So I got offered this job and this sponsorship for my degree with Fraser-Nash. Now, it turns out that my choice of courses and my choice of universities hadn't been that well researched, and I actually struggled quite a lot at Cambridge. I struggled a lot with the step up in difficulty between school and uni, and to be honest, I also really struggled socially. But I was surprised to find that my summer placements at Fraser-Nash I really enjoyed. So although they had an office round the corner from my dad's house, they actually sent me to their Bristol office, and I really loved living in the city. I loved living in Bristol. I really enjoyed working with the team. They were quite young, and they were really smart and sociable, and I made lots of really good friends there. But one of the things that I enjoyed most was the massive variety of different projects that they seemed to have going on, all at the same time. So like, everybody was working on something different, but there was still this real team spirit, and there was this huge variety of different things that you could get involved with. So I was quite interested in energy and the environment. So when the time came to specialise, I chose fluid dynamics, heat transfer and thermodynamics modules at uni. I also did some nuclear energy, and I also did some management modules, because at the time I still had in the back of my head that I wanted to do a job in economics when I graduated. And actually, I had really quite enjoyed working at Fraser-Nash, so I decided to accept a graduate job there. And I thought, well, I'm going to start out in this engineering consultancy and we'll see how things go. So I ended up doing a few kind of random bits and pieces of other people's projects. And then I spent about 18 months working on a project which I basically had no interest in at all. And I found it quite difficult to fit into the project team. It was a bit of a toxic environment. It was very competitive. I was the only woman, had a really strong overtime culture, and I just wasn't happy there. So I was trying to do my chartered engineer training at the time, but I was getting quite frustrated because I was struggling to get the right management experience, and I was seeing others getting promoted ahead of me, and especially seeing young female engineers in the media looking like they were being really successful and having really interesting careers. So I had a bit of a false start there, really, with my graduate career. But during this period, I went to a lunchtime presentation, which was being given by somebody who I had met back when I was a student intern. And the project they were working on, I thought, was something I was much more interested in. So I went and had a chat with them afterwards about whether there might be an opportunity to get involved with that. And the opportunity didn't actually come up for about another 18 months. But during that time, I was really persistent in asking how it was going and showing lots of interest. So when another graduate left the project manager really wanted somebody who they thought would be committed and would stick with it. And so they were confident that I'd be a good choice for the job. But as I got more confident, I moved into a role where my job was not to do the calculations, but to help the client to figure out which calculations to do, to work with the consultancy to identify the right method for the calculations, what skills we would need, and then to help choose the project team. And then once we'd done the work and we had the results, my job was to help the client to understand them and then to make sure that that analysis was being interpreted in the right way. And I was a lot happier in this job. I got on really well with the project team. I got 2 promotions reasonably quickly, and soon enough I was managing a team working on a series of quite similar projects. So by this point, I was nearly 30 and I finally felt like I was starting to get somewhere with my career. I became a chartered engineer, and the feedback from my C-Eng interview actually suggested I should become a STEM ambassador, which is something I'd never considered before. So I signed up and I did a careers talk with an A-level physics class, but I had a bit of a crisis of confidence and I didn't have the guts to go and work with anybody younger than that. I don't know why. I think I was, I was a bit scared of going in and working with younger teenagers. So around that time, my husband got offered a secondment in New Zealand, which was an amazing opportunity for us because we'd always wanted to go there. So we jumped at the chance. However, there is not any nuclear power in New Zealand. So I had to think about what else I might want to do. And I decided I was going to use the move as an opportunity to do something completely different. And I actually applied for quite a few quite random non-engineering jobs before eventually I found a place called the Mind Lab. Now, the Mind Lab was a company who did training for teachers, helping them to be more confident with tech. And they also did extracurricular digital activities for students. So in this job, I was teaching teachers and kids things like how to code games in Scratch, electronics, but also some really creative stuff like stop motion animation and how to use a green screen. And I was basically learning this stuff as I was teaching it. But the reason I got offered the job in the first place was because I got quite good at communicating technical things to non-specialist audiences, which is something I had lots of experience in when I was trying to explain things like gas flows and heat transfer to nuclear safety inspectors in my previous job. So that was a transferable skill, which came in really useful for this totally unrelated job. So we had a really great adventure in New Zealand for 18 months. But when that came to an end, my intention had been to go back to my previous consultancy. And I was also really keen, having got some experience working with kids, to do some more STEM ambassador work. But then I found this advert for a job at the SS Great Britain. Now, before I tell you any more about the job, I probably should try and explain a bit more about the ship. So the SS Great Britain was the world's first iron ship. And she was also the world's first propeller-driven ship. She was designed by one of the famous Victorian engineers, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. The ship had a really long and successful career, and she had a really huge social and economic impact on the world and on the British Empire because she carried migrants. After a 94-year working life, she was abandoned in the Falkland Islands after some storm damage. But then in 1970, she was salvaged, she was refloated, and she was towed across the Atlantic back to Bristol, which is where she'd been built. And then during the 1990s, she was conserved and she was restored as a museum. So with the ship being 175 years old, the iron hull is very susceptible to corrosion. So to overcome this, the environment underneath and inside the ship is kept at 20% relative humidity, which is as dry as a desert, basically. And the equipment used to achieve this creates a protective curtain of dry air around the surface of the metal. And it was designed by a team of consultants in the early 2000s. Now, the individual components of this system were maintained by contractors, but the museum were looking for an engineer to take ownership of the system as a whole and to be responsible for the future strategy for conserving the ship. So I decided to apply for the job, and even though I didn't know anything about ships or museums, my experience with modelling gas flows and my experience with helping clients to understand analysis results and communicating technical ideas to non-technical people meant that they decided I was a really good fit, and I got offered this really exciting new job. So it's been really interesting for me moving from nuclear energy into a museum. I'm working with a team of curators, and they're archaeologists, they're art historians, and I am the only engineer in the team. So conservation, museum conservation, is something I've had to learn about while I've been in this job. And it's a really interesting field because it is so multidisciplinary. And there is a lot of science involved, but there's also a lot of arts and crafts involved. And it's also really interesting to have learned so much about the human side of heritage and about the work of a curator and about how you communicate stories to audiences. So piecing together how the airflow system worked, I surprised myself a bit by being able to make some improvements straight away to the controls, so that was really cool. And then I found I was able to use my previous experience writing project proposals to apply for funding for a new set of sensors and a smart building system to help to optimise the performance of the system. And again, here it was my experience in communicating technical ideas to non-technical people, which I was then using to persuade funders to give us a grant that we would be able to use for this system. But obviously I had to explain to them what the system was going to do. So that was a really cool thing, to be able to just come into a completely new sector and find my feet and to be able to make an impact. One of the things which I had also managed to do using the experience that I'd built up to this point was to become much more confident as a STEM ambassador. And I really threw myself in and I took all the opportunities I possibly could to do outreach activities, to speak at events, but also to kind of help people with their CVs and run mock interviews in schools and all sorts of really fun stuff. But the other amazing thing which I've had the chance to do in my current job is to do some TV work as well. So I've actually been in a couple of documentaries about the ship. And I've also had the chance to speak at some conferences. And one of the conferences I spoke at last year, I had some funding from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers to go to it. And off the back of that, I decided to apply for one of their awards, and I decided to apply for some other awards. And again, managed to surprise myself by winning some awards by kind of describing my journey and how I'd managed to kind of move between different areas of engineering. So even though I'm now 12 years since I graduated, I still feel like I'm really only just getting started. I've got this career ahead of me, and to be honest, I don't know what I'm going to do next, and I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I don't find that too scary. I actually find it really exciting because having built up the confidence to get where I am now, I know that I can use those skills and I can apply them in all sorts of different situations. And I also know that how easy it is to keep developing new skills. So it's been a bit of a journey so far to get to where I am. But actually, all of those times when I wasn't really sure what I was doing, or I wasn't really happy and I had to change direction, at the time I was really worried about the fact that I was getting behind. But in reality, all of those experiences helped to kind of build that variety of experience, which has got me to where I am today, and it helps me to do my job now. So I think if I could give one piece of advice to my 18 or my 20-year-old self, it would be about finding the balance between pursuing the career you want, but also giving situations a chance if they're not what you had in mind. If you're doing something that you aren't passionate about and that you can't easily change, it's very easy to get frustrated, but actually it's okay. You can be doing your research and you can be setting the wheels in motion to get where you want to be, but make sure you also take time to reflect and acknowledge the experience that you're gaining in your current situation. Don't compare yourself to other people. Your career is not a race. Everyone's experience is different. And I sometimes feel that by taking the scenic route, at the time I got very frustrated, but actually now I'm really pleased with where I've got to. Thank you very much.